Blessings, everyone. This is Reverend Avron with the Four Pillar Shrine. Today, I would like to talk about the idea of ritual purity. Now, ritual purity is a really interesting concept for me in Wicca because it's kind of challenging, and after all these years, I haven't really found a way to isolate where this idea comes from. So you find the idea of ritual purity in a lot of other religious traditions. Basically, that means is for the practitioner or for the space or for the ritual tools or what have you to be ritually purified, ritually um, cleansed, or ritually prepared or appropriate to be used for religious purposes. And depending on the religious tradition that you belong to, there's always a sort of continuum or some sort of a rules as to what's pure and what's impure. So every religious tradition has some form of this purity. And it makes me wonder why exactly these religious traditions have this concept of what's pure and what's impure. So, for instance, if you talk about in the Hindu tradition, you find a lot of this idea of ritual purity, wanting to be purified, wanting to be pure of, in terms of, sin, if you want to call it that, to be able to reach moksha or type of enlightenment. Not exactly the same thing as the Buddhist understanding of nirvana, but moksha is kind of similar to that, this idea of ceasing to be reincarnated. So there's this essence of ritual purity, and there's this idea of purifying oneself in the Ganges River in particular, because it's a holy river in India. Of course, you find ritual purity in other things. Most of us know about the Jewish tradition of kosher. Basically, I believe that whole saying of cleanliness is next to godliness comes from the Jewish tradition because the Jewish practitioners were always very focused on cleanliness, on ritual purity. On things that were clean and were unclean. And in the Jewish tradition, they have a continuum. This is, pure. This is unpure. There are things that are, maybe ritualistically indifferent. Some things are never acceptable, forbidden. Then there are some things that are, kind of acceptable. Then there are some things that are ritually pure, and then there are things that are holy. So you have a whole continuum of things. And so in the Jewish tradition, the way that my rabbi explained it to me was that certain things that were seen as uncommon or unusual to the early um, Jews um, would have been, I guess you would say the early Hebrews, um, would have been considered to be unclean. So, for instance, that's why certain things like shellfish are unclean because it was something that wasn't very common for people in the desert. And then there was a whole sort of morality built into that sort of thing. And so there were some things that were completely forbidden, like pork, and then there were other things that were acceptable. And of course, in terms of kosher, referring specifically to food, but there were other things as well that were considered to be unkosher, non-food related items as well. So, but the whole basis of kosher and unkosher is about cleanliness, being ritually pure or ritually impure. And of course, you have something very similar in the Muslim tradition, the Islamic tradition as well, and that's why practitioners will perform absolutions before prayer to purify themselves. And there's a whole ritualized way of washing before the prayer starts. And of course, in the Christian tradition, you find that a little bit, I think, with the idea of holy water to cleanse yourself, make yourself holy. And of course, the whole idea of baptism is to do the same thing, to absolve you of all of your sins and to prepare you to lead a certain religious and holy life. So, baptism, of course, being the highest form of ritual purification. And so you find all sorts of other religions. Interestingly enough, in the Shinto religion, which is a faith that I've been studying a lot about, there's this whole idea of ritual purity and impurity, and generally things that death, decay, dirt, illness, those sort of things are seen as ritually impure, and so there's such a strong um, abhorrence of death in the Shinto tradition that to this day, Shinto priests and shrine maidens do not perform funerals at the shrine. Sometimes they will perform them at like a funeral home, but they do not perform them at the shrine because the shrine is a holy place, a place of cleanliness, a place of purity, and death is the highest form of impurity in the Shinto faith. There's a whole story about, a whole myth about Izanami and Izanagi going to the underworld. That whole thing, of course, Izanagi coming out of the underworld and Izanami staying in the underworld, and dies and rots and decays and that sort of thing, and then um, he tries to leave, and after he's able to escape the underworld, he goes and performs absolutions. It's called misochi, and he performs misochi, and then he's pure. And so that's why people today practice misochi and purification, ohari, things like that, in order to purify themselves of any of this sumi or kagare, which is like negativity, things of that nature. So you find that idea of ritual purification and purity throughout all religions. Now, there is a religious and mythological impetus for why these religions practice what they do and why their opinions of these things are, why they're pure, why they're impure. There's always some sort of an idea. Either it's because of a kosher law, or it's because of a halal law, or it's because of this idea of tsumi, kagare, and ritual purification, ohare. So in the Wiccan tradition, there is still a sort of element of that. This idea of performing ritual baths, this idea of blessing me, blessing my objects, blessing my ritual tools, doing all this blessing. But the question is why? And it's something that I've been thinking a lot about. And, well, we perform the blessing because that's what we're supposed to do. We perform the blessing because it's not pure. We perform the blessing because our ritual tools need to be blessed and consecrated before we can use them. Why? Why? Honestly, I don't know the answer. Maybe it has something to do, maybe it comes from ceremonial magic. I don't know. I understand the idea of things being, being having negativity attracted to them, things having been polluted by negative energy, by negative intentions, by that sort of thing. And you want to clear it away and start fresh. Same thing with our bodies. They become polluted by negativity, impurity, um, ungrounded energies, that sort of thing. We have to purify ourselves and everything. I understand that. And that is reason enough to perform these acts of ritual purity and ritual baths and things of that nature to prepare ourselves for ritual and things like that. But Wicca doesn't have the same predisposition as other traditions do. For instance, the Christian tradition, they have an understanding of original sin. So we have to purify ourselves of original sin through baptism and to purify ourselves to be ready to accept Jesus Christ. Got it. Understand it. Again, in the Shinto tradition, we have to perform ohari, we have to perform misoji, all these other forms of ritual purification to rid ourselves of the negativity or the tsumi or those sort of negative things. Got it. Because in the Shinto tradition, death is the highest form of negativity, of impurity, that sort of thing. In Wicca, we don't see it that way. Death is a part of life. To say that death is any better or worse is silly, in my opinion. Okay, well, death is a part of life. Death is important. We die in order to be reborn. So why should we think, oh, death is dirty, death is bad, death is whatever, I need to purify myself? To me, it just doesn't really fit into our understanding of the world, of how things are supposed to be. Now, I can understand the idea of clearing away impurities in terms of negative energy, ungrounded energy, that sort of thing, because in order for us to perform proper workings, ritual, magic, whatever, we have to be focused, we have to be centered. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's some big, bad, negative energy that we have to protect ourselves from. And so, I think that ritual purity is important. I think it's something that we need to practice, but I don't think that there's such a strong emphasis about ritual purity in Wicca as there are in other traditions. And I think it's important that we understand that negative energy exists. Some people believe that as being, negative, evil energy, but it's not. It's simply negative polarity, negative energy. It throws off your balance and needs to be cleared away. It needs to be removed. It needs to be grounded. Negative energy in the Correllian tradition is also ungrounded energy, scattered energy. It needs to be focused. It needs to be grounded. And so thinking about those things, we can place ourselves into a position where we can really understand the whole purpose of ritual purity and the whole purpose of ritual baths. And I think that if you're feeling particularly sluggish or bogged down, performing, acts of ritual purification are helpful. And I think that especially when gaining ritual tools, it's important to begin by purifying them as well, to clear away the negative energy. But I don't think that ritual purity is as severe and concern as it is in some other traditions. Again, with the Shinto tradition, the entire practice is based upon ritual purity. You go and you perform these absolutions before you go into the shrine. You go and you perform these absolutions on important days. They have 2 days a year that are holidays that are specifically geared toward ritual purification and to clear away all the negative tsumi kagare from the world in general. So I think it's important to understand. And in my opinion, and you're welcome to disagree. My opinion is that there isn't some big mass of negative energy that's out there attacking people. I just don't think that it's like that. I think that energy can become polarized and become negative and become able to bog us down and become able to distract us and scatter our energies. And by removing those, raising the vibrations, bringing them together to a direct goal is important. But I just am not so sure that doing that all the time just because is important. I mean, doing it for magic, doing it for ritual, doing it for worship, yes. If you're using it for those purposes, then clearing, releasing, psychic hygiene, all those things are important. But in terms of just, well, I guess it's time to do it now, really, to me, just doesn't seem to make any sense because we are a religion of nature. And to say that there are certain things in nature that are pure and certain things in nature that are impure, to me, doesn't make any sense. We are panentheists. God lives in the universe. God lives also outside of the universe. God is eminent and God is transcendent. God is manifest in the universe as part of the universe, but God is also outside of the universe. So I find it very difficult to make a delineation between this is what's good and this is what's not good in terms of nature, because nature has a balance of all its own. And practicing Wicca in a nature-based faith, understanding that nature is going to control itself and keep a balance all on its own. The real importance is the negativity that's affecting our lives. And I don't necessarily agree with the Shinto concept of death being this great. Now, I understand disease, cancer, illness, obviously is something that needs to be cleared away. It needs to be purified. It needs to be removed. It needs to, we need to work magic to make people better. That's part of who we are and what we do as members of the craft of the wise. But I don't think inherently death is negative and impure. Well, so that's just my opinion. If you have any other opinions, please feel free to comment in the comment section. Let me know what you think. Let me know about your opinions. Let me know what you think about negative energy and ritual purification.